would you climb in an aeroplane where the pilot practiced as much as the average salesperson? Well, no, you wouldn't, would you?
Welcome back, everybody. I'm delighted to have Patrick Bakousas with me again. Hello, Patrick.
Hi, John. Thanks.
Hey, we've had some great discussions about value, and the last one was about trust. And while we were talking, I realised that it's really all about how we have a conversation with a client. How do you recommend people develop the capability of having a very good one-to-one peer-level conversation between a salesperson and a senior executive? How does a salesperson position for that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, John. You know, ironically, we can do that really well with our friends. We can sit down and engage with them and have a really good balanced conversation. But when we get with buyers, it's we transform. We take on a different persona, you know. And I guess the issue there is it's habit. You know, selling is habit. In fact, we've evolved to sell. We've evolved to sort of debate, to convince and persuade people to our point of view. So it's as much as anything about what you don't do than what you do. You know, it's a case of shut up and listen and get the other person to talk. So as to your question in terms of how do you learn how to do that, it's like any habit, I guess. It's a case of practicing. And, you know, it's ironic that salespeople, I think, or sales would be the least practiced profession in the world.
Do you think so?
Well, I think so. I often ask the question, I say to people, look, would you climb in an aeroplane where the pilot practiced as much as the average salesperson? Well, no, you wouldn't, would you?
Yeah.
And yet, here's what is it about flying? Flying. The important thing about flying is it's safe, but it works. I mean, most of the time it works. You get to where you want to be most of the time, and it all works. In the case of selling, most of the time it doesn't work. You know, our failure rate in selling is much higher than our success rate. We need to take on board, well, why is that? And that's probably
just as well we're not killing people when we fail.
Exactly. So I'd suggest that we need to look at practicing to change those habits.
Well, I think conversation is just one part of being successful. Obviously,
Yes.
we need to qualify and so on and
Yes.
so forth. But that conversation is vital.
Yes.
As we've talked about, you know, we've got to actually understand the value that the customer is going to get from changing their behaviour.
Yeah.
We have to build trust.
Yeah.
And so on. And yet, if I'm talking with a senior executive, I mean, it takes a few things to make me position and feel comfortable that I can command their respect.
Yes.
And be in the moment in the conversation.
Yes.
So practice is one thing. What else? I mean, obviously...
Well, I think that salespeople sort of tend to overplay the hand. You're always thinking in terms of, I need to be seen to be competent. I need to be seen to be on top of things. And so we're sort of...
And we end up telling instead of asking questions.
Yeah, we're trying hard. And ironically, one of those things that grows trust, remember, is transparency and openness. So the odd fumble and things like that just make you look human. They're disarming. And whereas, you know, the glib salesperson is not what anyone wants to see.
Don't trust this guy.
No.
He's too glib.
No. So, you know, it's interesting. You can sit next to someone that you met at an aeroplane, and where are they going? They're going on holiday somewhere. And you can have a conversation to get to understand, well, why is it you're going there? What do you enjoy about being there? In other words, understand their perceptions of value about this holiday destination. It's exactly the same conversation we need to have with a CEO or anyone about, you know, what their perceptions of value.
One of the important things I would put on the table there is having domain expertise, because you can't have a conversation with somebody when you haven't got the domain expertise to have that conversation. Even if you're not telling them anything, you have to know how to ask the questions that are relevant to the domain you're having the discussion in.
Yeah, that's the value of the expertise. Is it might enable you to ask a more informed question, absolutely. But don't air it. I guess that's the advice I would always give. It just helps you ask better questions. It's not essential. I'd pick the ability to ask good questions generally ahead of domain expertise anytime. However, if you've got both, then that's a benefit. But don't rely on it. Just help you. Because the trouble is, again, that we're 98% of the time on autopilot. We're not thinking. I mean, you and I aren't thinking right now. Most of the time, in a conversation, we're not thinking.
There's no script here, guys.
No, that's right. You can't think of an intelligent question because thinking is really, really slow. And so we need to develop habits that make it automatic, that we say, it's much easier to say, oh, tell me more about that, John, or why, how do you feel about that, John, or why does that happen? That's much easier to do than trying to think of some convoluted question. The buyer's looking at you with a bemused expression on their face, so the question gets a little bit more complicated, and you tie yourself up in knots, and it goes downhill fast.
So the bottom line you're talking about is practice.
Absolutely.
You know, none of us do enough practice.
No.
And if you think about the top golfers in the world, the top tennis players, sports people across, they put an enormous amount of practice in.
Yes.
And then big professions like, again, you use the airline pilot one, but if you were going to go in for an operation, if the doctor had only practiced as much as you had as a salesperson, would you be comfortable?
Well, and if he did it the same way as he did the last time when he killed a patient, would you be happy? No, but we in selling do the same thing. We do the same thing again. The only difference is we don't carry out the dead.
Okay, so role plays are important, practice is important.
Yeah.
Is there any particular approach to doing role plays and practice that you think works well?
And I think one thing to do is to keep it simple, and you can practice with anyone, your friends, family. What I encourage people to do is get someone to think of some significant purchase, maybe a caravan, a car, a camera, or something like that, and have a conversation with them, and get to understand what it is they're looking for in that thing. What would they value in that caravan? You don't need any knowledge to do that. The interesting thing is that sometimes when you have those conversations, those people aren't terribly sure what the value is thereafter either. They stop and think, well, maybe I don't need a caravan after all. And that's a really good outcome.
Yeah.
Okay?
Yeah.
Just learn to have that conversation like you would with a friend.
Okay, but also for salespeople and sales managers, I think a lot of sales managers understand the customer environment better than the salespeople. They've been there longer and so on.
Yes.
They're good people to have practice with. And it's,
Absolutely.
If your sales manager is always up in the gods and doing all the administrative work and everything, you don't see much of them. Demand that they come down and practice.
Just anyone. You can get someone around the office, some administration staff, but hey, come down, Mary, sit with me. I want to practice a call. This is the situation. If you do that, like I used to do it with my teams, about an hour a week, you can sit and do some interesting sums on this, in terms of if you spend an hour a week doing this, figuring out how many hours you actually spend selling and how many hours you spend losing, and spend it in terms of practicing, just like an elite sports person, and figure out what the material improvement in your performance is. It's amazing.
I think it is, but I agree with you, all that practice good. The other practice that I think is vital, and just about every call or every important call we go on, it's worth practicing for that call.
Yeah.
So it's worth taking what you know about that customer, giving it to somebody that then pretends they are the customer, and they understand what the scenario is, and now you practice with them before you actually go into the customer environment. Yeah. And if you understand the character you're going to be working with, that person can display that character as well. So if you look at the DISC model, if they're a strong D, make sure that person behaves as a D, and then you go through that process. Another good way
is that the buyer well, potentially, you play the role, and you get one of your colleagues to run the call like you would. That's really informative. To, in a sense, see yourself in a mirror, see someone else doing it, and think, oh, that didn't work. You actually learn a lot from watching your colleague do that.
The other thing I do is I make sure I build a whole library of case studies.
Yes.
And then use the case studies and do a call planner in that case study, and then go in and practice.
Learn from experience. We do it absolutely everywhere else. All professions do it.
So I'll close this conversation in 1 second, but let's just ask the question, how many practice sessions and role plays should I do in a week, in a month?
Okay. I suggest you should sales managers should set specific team time aside, but in terms of how many you should do, well, whenever it's really significant. If you're in doubt in terms of how to run a call, if you're not convinced you're going to come out of there with a really good outcome for the buyer, that they're going to get a good result, then practice it.
Okay, and I'd agree with that. If you're not doing, at least in my view, at least 5 practice sessions a week, and probably need to do more, then you're not doing enough. And I'm not talking about inexperienced salespeople. I'm talking about very experienced sales. I think as my sales career progressed, I found I was doing more and more practices before I went in, because I realised it really paid dividends.
So, John, you know, you're a golfer. You go out and in subsequent rounds, you screw up getting out of bunkers. What are you going to go practice next
Go to
time?
the
you go out
driving
there?
range and try and sort it out. Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
And lots of hit lots of balls. It's the same practice. So there you go, guys. Simple rule: you need to have very, very good conversations with your client. We've talked about how it's all about asking questions and not about telling the client, bringing insight in the questions and so on. But you need to practice that. And the last thing you need is a script, right? You actually think about that customer and go in. As soon as you have a script, you start directing the conversation rather than letting the customer go in the direction you want. Now, you do need to control the conversation a little bit, but you don't do that by having a script and being scriptive. You need to be in the moment.
Yep.
Hope you got value out of that. Patrick, thank you very much.
Thank you, John.